plan procurement management. So in this process, what happens is we generate the plan of how the organizations approach towards the vendors. So this is basically done at the very beginning of the project. So without these procurements, the project cannot move forward very smoothly. So this is done at the very beginning of the project. But as the project moves ahead, there might be some addition of new requirements. Like, for example, the customer has asked suddenly for twice the number of products. So the same single vendor cannot produce so many numbers. So in that case, what we do is we add another vendor to it. Just an example. So in the middle of the project lifecycle, we can also do this procurement management plan, not just limited to the beginning of the project. So let's take a quick look at the outputs that we need to build. Okay, we have 10 outputs that we need to work on. So let's quickly go through each one of them. The procurement management plan gets updated. What happens is this should include all the activities that are needed to be undertaken in the procurement process. So all the competitors who are bidding for the business, or the timetable of the activities, let's say constraints or assumptions, all these things are mentioned in this project management plan. You can also include legal documents, the risks that are involved, the opportunities that we see. Everything can be recorded in this procurement management plan. Next thing is the procurement strategy. What happens here is the main purpose is that we have to determine how we are going to perform the procurement through different phases of the project. Like the delivery methods, the payment contracts, phases within the procurement itself. The procurement itself has again phases similar to the project, right? So first they give only 50 numbers, and then they give 100 numbers, and then they give 200 numbers. So just an example of how these phases work. And then we have bid documents. I think it is self-explanatory. This is nothing but a document which has been proposed as a quotation about the money or the amount the vendors seek to make this product, right? So first there'll be request from the user organization, of course, in the form of RFI or RFQ. It's like request for information or request for quotation. And then finally, the organization which is buying the product will ask for RFP, request for proposal, where the vendors will send that, okay, this is the final proposal, having all the money, the amount that they seek to make this product, right? So next thing is procurement statement of work. This is a document which talks about what technology the seller needs to have. So this basically explains how the product can be made using what technology. Some people might require for a coarse finishing, or some organizations might prefer that I need a fine finishing or a glossy finish to my product. So for this glossy finish to appear on the product, they need a special machinery, special technology is needed. So such statement of work is mentioned in this, after the procurement plan is done. And then a source selection criteria. This is also decided. What happens here is that before the organization moves ahead to even initiate the conversation with the vendors, what they do is they assess whether this vendor actually has a good track with other customers or even within the organization in the previous projects, right? So that is this criteria. Make or buy decisions are just the result of thorough brainstorming after analyzing whether it is profitable to create this part, or is it profitable to just purchase it from the sellers. So it usually happens when there is a technology or expertise that is already available in house. So consider you are making a water bottle. You already have this technology, but you are overloaded with other projects. So in this case, what we do, we just buy it from one of the similar part making vendor, right? So make or buy decisions only happens usually when we have the similar technology, but we still want to purchase it. So the independent cost estimates, what are they? They are sometimes a person from outside the organization also helps us in estimating. We have all learned about the expert judgments in each and every process, right? So such experts are consulted to estimate the cost, just to compare whether our estimation and the third party's estimation are same or not. So we have to also gather information and as an output of this process. All the change requests, anything that has changed due to the procurement process, that has to be recorded, and all the relevant project documents have to be updated. The organization process assets is also being changed here. Why? This is not so common, right? This is being changed because of the long list of documents that we have just learned. The procurement strategy, the statement of work, the bid documents, all these things that we talked about, they affect or they are directly considered as the organizational process assets. So they have to be updated. Okay, let's have a quick look at the inputs. We have 6 inputs. All of them, as you can see, are quite common. However, let's go quickly one by one. The project charter is used and it's quite often referred to. The business documents, like the business case, for example, the benefits management plan, they are all referred as inputs. The project management plan and all possible, all relevant components within the project management plan, they can be referred to. All the relevant project documents are referred. You understand the difference between business document and project documents, right? So this is purely related to the strategy. And here we are talking about the project process. So, and of course, the 2 default processes, the enterprise environmental factors and the organizational process assets, are referred to as inputs. Oops. We have tools and techniques. Here, as usual, the expert are consulted. Someone who is expert in the types of contracts or the local regulations, they are usually consulted here. All possible data gathering tools and data analysis tools that we learned before, they can be used as tools and techniques. Source selection analysis, I think this is something new, a new term here. So what happens here is that when we get quotations from different vendors, right, the purchase team, what they do is they do an analysis of which supplier offers the best solution to our problem, and which supplier is the cheapest bidder. So such kind of analysis is done. They don't just blindly give away business to anybody. Usually for each product, at least 3 vendors are consulted, and out of these 3, one best vendor is selected to give business. So, and also meetings is also a very good tool. Meeting with the vendors, meeting with internal stakeholders also about this procurement process. It's a good tool for the complete process. Okay, moving on to the next process. Conducting the procurements. This process is done periodically. It's done throughout the project, and it's updated as and when needed. Let's have a look at the outputs. We have 5 outputs to cover. The selected sellers. After this activity, there'll be a list of selected sellers who are finalized to provide us, support in creating the part, or to support the service. So the final selected sellers are listed here. Multiple agreements like the schedules, the milestones, the incentives, or consider the quality acceptance criteria, general terms and conditions. So all of them are gathered as agreements. Change requests, if any, are also updated, and all relevant project management plan and its related components, like procurement management plan, schedule baseline, cost baseline, anything that is related to procurement, that is updated here. And the organizational process assets. Okay, again, this is also being updated here. This is usually an input, guys, and we are considering here as output. Here, why? Because we are adding new suppliers. So the organization has a new list of suppliers after this process. So that is an important organizational process asset. So, and sometimes if a existing supplier is deleted, that is also recorded here. So some suppliers we might have bad experience, right? So they are increasing the cost frequently, or they are not adhering to their schedule of producing the parts, or they are giving a lot of quality issues. Such all bad experiences are recorded, lessons learned, and then they are deleted from the list of complete organizational process assets. Let's take a look at the inputs that we need. Okay, we have 6 inputs to cover. The project management plan and its components, of course, are referred to. All the project related documents are referred. Procurement documents. What happens here? Consider the example of bidding documents, or statement of work, cost estimates. All the procurement related documentation that we discussed in the previous process, they are referred here. Seller proposals. What are these? Seller proposals, they are nothing but the quotations that we receive. Right? I think we also discussed about this in the previous process. So they are referred as inputs here, right? And of course, the default enterprise environmental factors and organization process assets are referred. Let's have a look at the tools and techniques. The experts here, the proposal evaluation, the experts are needed, whether the given proposal is up to the market rate or not. And for negotiation, also some experts are needed. Some financial experts who are very good at negotiation, they are also consulted here. Advertising, this is also a new term. I mean, this term itself is not new to you, but here in this PMBOK guide. So what happens here is to attract the vendors. Usually the organizations have a set of predefined vendors who they usually contact based on the previous project experience. But if in case the technology is disrupting, or it's totally new. In that case, the vendors might be limited. Or consider a new organization from a foreign nation has come here. They don't know which is the right vendor. So in this case, the organization give these advertisements in newspaper, in electronic media, in the internet, calling for bidding, right? So that is this advertisement. Bidder conferences, they are nothing but the meetings between buyer and seller. Usually the face-to-face meetings that happen between them. So the marketing people from the buyers, marketing people from sellers, they both come together at the table, and then they discuss the terms. The vendors understand the expectations from the buyers. Yeah, so they are the bidder conferences. Different data analysis tools are handy, and multiple interpersonal team skills can be used to convince the vendors on the costs. I think we are done with this process. We can move ahead to the controlling procurements, which is the next process. So what happens here is this ensures that both buyer and seller, they are performing to meet the project requirements continuously, and then they are monitored here, controlling or monitoring the performances of both buyer and seller. So because this is a monitoring process, this is done not just at one point in time, this is done throughout the project. Let's have a quick look at the targeted outputs. Okay, we have 7 targeted outputs. Let's quickly go one by one. So starting with the closed procurements, this is a formal written notice to all the vendors that the contract is now completed after ensuring all the deliveries, and then we are closing the procurement. Such formal written notice stating the closure of procurement. That is the closed procurements. So all these statements or the notices are gathered after this. When we talk about work performance information, this includes all the quality reports from vendors, the delivery or schedules, whether they are adhered to or not. All such information is there. The procurement documents like approved change requests, for example, or the technical documents from the vendors, all of them are gathered here. Any change request that is generated through the process, they are also updated. The components from the project management plan, which are relevant here, like procurement management plan, the schedule baseline, and the cost baseline, all of them are also updated. The project documents like lessons learned, the risk register, all of them are also updated here. And here also you can see organizational process assets are being updated. After the monitoring, the experience with the vendor, that might change, just like the previous process. So, or if all there are new schedules that are agreed between the vendors and the buyers, they are also updated here. Let's see what inputs that we need. I think they are all quite general here. As let's see quickly, the project management plan, all the relevant components are referred to, all the relevant project documents like risk register, all relevant documents are referred to here. Agreements like non-disclosure agreements, memorandum of understanding, all these agreements are also referred to as considered as inputs. So similarly, all the procurement documents that we discussed in the previous, all the approved change requests are referred to. Work performance data about the quality reports, the delivery schedules, all of them are also taken as inputs. And the default enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets are also considered as inputs. As you can see, all these are repeated processes, right? So it's no point in repeating the explanation. So I'm running for the sake of time. Okay, tools. Again, the expert who is expert in controlling processes, monitoring processes, they are consulted. The claims administration, I think this is something new. We can spend a bit of time here. Claims, this is a tough case where in case of a concern, let's say we have a quality issue in the product. Now, both seller and buyer, both they are not agreeing that the quality issue is because of their process. So what happens here is this little disagreement becomes an issue, and then it becomes a claim, right? So a claim is something which has no responsible person identified. That is the escalated problem. So what happens here is if this gets worse, it can also go up to legal undertaking. Either the buyer or seller can also seek support from the jurisdiction of that land, and it gets really worse. So to come a step down, instead of directly going to the legal jurisdiction, an emerging trend that is happening here is both the parties, buyer and seller, they are agreeing for some ADRs. ADRs are nothing but alternate dispute resolution. So at the beginning of the agreement of the procurement itself, both buyer and seller, they come in agreement with this situation that, okay, if in future we get a situation like claims administration, what we do is we will go to some XYZ third party, and then whatever he tells us to do, we will do it. So such kind of alternate dispute resolution techniques are usually administered. So others are the similar ones that we learned before. Data analysis tools, whatever we learned, whatever can be applied, they can be applied. There is no limit to it. Inspection methods, multiple inspection methods used for monitoring and controlling all the procurement processes can be done. Audits, supplier audits are done by the supplier quality engineers from the buying organization, and sometimes a third party audits are also sought out, certification, whether they have TUV certification, whether they have ISI certification, right? So all the certifications are asked for. So audits are an important technique to assess the vendors. So I think this is the last process. So we have ended that one knowledge area. Let's move to this new knowledge area, project stakeholder management. So who is a stakeholder? Stakeholder is someone who affects the project, or someone who is getting affected by the project. So as a project manager, it is our duty to make them engaged in the work and make them contribute to the success. When I say them, they are the stakeholders. It's not an easy job for sure, considering multiple priorities that the stakeholders has. It's very difficult as a project manager to make people come towards our own project. So the stakeholders who are affected by the project can, they can take both positive effects and also negative effects, right? So not always the persons are affected only positively because of the project. Like for example, we have an automation project which is going to eliminate 10 employees from the organization. So all those 10 employees are being affected negatively because of this new automation project. So, and again, when we talk about the differences between the stakeholders, some stakeholders are quite influential. So consider a functional leader who's head of the complete research and development organization or department. So he's quite influential. Whatever he says, there is a lot of support to his word. He can get things done. So similarly, a stakeholder who is not as influential as the functional leader. So it could be just an IT engineer who has his influence only within his own work scope. So he cannot take management decisions. So everybody is important here. It's not like only CEOs can come to create a code. So not all CEOs are so free that they can come and code it. So the person who is less influential is also important. The person who is highly influential is also important for the project. So every stakeholder is important for the project to move ahead. So the project manager's duty is to analyze each one of these profiles, who is key for the project, who is not so important for the project. There are also some stakeholders who are not directly contributing to the stage of the project. So, for example, a logistics guy or a packaging guy, he might not have that much influence at the beginning of the project, but he will have influence at the end of the project. So, we have to profile each and every stakeholder and understand who is important at this particular stage of the project. When we talk about latest trends here, new engagement techniques like team building activities, multiple brainstorming ideas to improve the bonding, the rapport between the stakeholders, they're all being used. Supporting the stakeholders who are overloaded, that is also being done. Sometimes a new staff or support stakeholder is also being added. This is more prominently seen in agile methods, right? So when agile sprints are happening, we understand that who is overloaded and who is having a bit of free time. So with this understanding, the person who has some free time can support the person who is doing a lot of tasks. Of course, only when he is capable to do it. So let's have a quick look at the processes. Okay, we have 4 processes to cover also here. So let's quickly go one by one, identifying the stakeholders. So here, whoever are relevant for the project manager, he has to consider their interests and most importantly, the willingness of the stakeholders. So that is the identification part. So sometimes one of the stakeholders might be really busy with some other important project. So he might not be willing, even if he is important for this project. So, and he might have support of some influential people in the organization. So we cannot force him even when he is important to us. So his willingness is also important. So similarly, plan the stakeholder engagement. Here the approach, about how well we can encourage the engagement of the people by meeting their needs and expectations. So that is the plan here. Managing is about resolving the issues between two stakeholders, or supporting the effective communication. All these things are in the management. Monitoring, as we all know, it's nothing but controlling or assessing the performances of each and every stakeholder. Let's go a little bit in depth. The first process is identifying the stakeholders. What happens here is this is performed basically periodically and not done at one point in the project, because I know it's painful, or I think I have already mentioned this to you. Removing a stakeholder at the middle of the project, it is as painful as it can be. So a complete set of knowledge or experience goes away directly. So identification of the stakeholders, it is done at the very beginning of the project. But if in case some of the key stakeholders had to stop working on the project because of some XYZ reasons, he might be going on a long leave, or he might be even leaving the organization. So in that case, we can also use this identification part at the middle of the project. So let's have a quick look at the outputs. We have 4 outputs to cover. First thing is stakeholder register that gets updated. What happens here is it contains information about the identified stakeholders. Usually an employee number is written against all these identified stakeholders in this register. So if there is no employee number, usually there is an employee number, but some organizations, what they do, they give project specific ID numbers. So if in case of some government confidential projects, some special ID cards are given who can work in only some restricted areas. So such special identifications are all, they are given and then recorded in the stakeholder register. The change requests, any process or feature that is being modified, that gets updated after this process. All the important or relevant components like project management plan, the requirements management plan, the communications management plan, they're all updated here. And the project documents like, for example, assumptions log, the issues log, the risk register, everything that we have learned before, that gets updated here. Let's have a quick look at the inputs. Okay, we have 7 inputs that we can consider. Project charter is referred. Let's say the key stakeholders list that is available in the project charter from the previous projects. So that can be an important document to refer. Business documents like business case, benefits management plan, all the strategic documents, they can be referred here. All the important components from project management plan, they are referred. All the relevant project documents are referred. The memorandum of understanding, non-disclosure agreements, they are referred. And the default enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets, they're also referred as inputs here. Let's have a look at the tools and techniques. The experts are consulted, of course, the people who has knowledge about the power structure, and somebody who is basically have an understanding of politics within the organization. So they come quite handy here, because they know who is the most influential person, they know who can be the most important person for the project, so they can be onboarded. Data gathering techniques, all the general techniques like brainstorming, they're all used here. Multiple data analysis tools can be used. Data representation techniques, although we have learned some, I think one of the very important data representation tool which might attract some questions in the exam is this power interest grid. At least one question you can expect from power interest grid. So what happens here is, in the vertical line we have power, in the horizontal line we have interest. So this is power versus interest, and here we have interest, here we have power. It goes from low to high. Similarly, in this way, it goes from low to high. So this is the high point, this is the low point. Similarly, this is the low point and this is the high point. So what happens here is we are profiling each and every stakeholder here using data representation. When we say profiling, a person who has very high interest and a high power. So he could be the functional leader of R&D. He has very good power, and he also has very high interest in the organization. So he falls at this quadrant. So when we take 4 different quadrants, so a person who is in this quadrant, we have to manage him very closely. Manage closely. He's the most important person in the complete project for us. A person who has high power, but he has very low interest. He doesn't have interest on the project. What we have to do as a project manager, we have to keep him satisfied. We don't have to manage him closely. We have to keep him satisfied by giving regular updates about the project. Even though he doesn't have interest, he has power. He has power to take decisions of the project. So it is a project manager's duty to keep him informed about these statuses. That is the keep satisfied. And a person who has very less power, but he has a great interest, like the junior engineers, although they have very less power, they have quite a bit of interest in the project. They want to grow in the organization, they want to contribute, they want to prove themselves. So we always have to, as a project manager, we have to, although they are not involved in the project, it is our duty to keep them informed about the project statuses. If they are involved in the project, of course they know the knowledge of the project by themselves. Even if they are not, it is our duty as a manager to keep them informed. And the person who has very less power and less interest, they fall here in this category. We can almost ignore them, but it is not good to ignore. So we can spend minimum effort here. So the Pimborg guide says we can spend minimum effort on this stakeholder. So this is the power interest grid. At least one question you can definitely expect from this topic, hearing it. And not just this data representation. Before we move to the meetings, there are also other representation tools, like the stakeholder cube, for example, the salience model, or the direction of influence. Who is influencing who? A to B, or is it B to A? Right. So if it is the CEO of the organization, we of course know who's influencing who. But let us consider that A and B, both of them are functional heads. So in this case, who can influence who? We don't know whether R&D can influence the marketing or marketing influences the R&D. So the influence can go both ways. So that kind of representation diagrams are done. And of course, meetings serve as a very important tool. Let's move to the next process, the planning of stakeholder engagement. This is all about creating an action plan about how to interact with the stakeholders, how effectively we interact, how efficiently we interact, etc. This is usually done at the beginning of the project and also updated certain intervals. So let's have a quick look at the outputs. Okay, we have only one output to bring here. So the stakeholder engagement plan is created. This is, as you can see and understand, this is the component of final project management plan. It can be done in many styles. It can be done broadly, it can be done with a lot of details, or it can be done formally, it can be done informally. So basically, it contains all the strategies, all the action plans that the project manager will need to promote the involvement of the stakeholders. So let's see what inputs that we need. I think all of them are quite generic inputs that we have already learned. So let's quickly hover through them. We need project charter as input. We need different components from project management as inputs. We need project documents as input. We need multiple agreements, whatever we have learned, them as inputs. And of course, the default enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets are taken as inputs. Okay, moving on to the tools and techniques. Again, we have expert judgment, different data gathering techniques we can use, data analysis tools, we can make use whatever we have learned, decision making tools. So everything that you can use, you can be using here. Data representation, I think we have to focus a bit here because the Pimborg guide specifically mentions about a representation tool called mind mapping here. What happens in mind mapping is, again, I make use of the pen. We have stakeholder 1, stakeholder 2, stakeholder 3, stakeholder 4, all of them listed. And then we do an engagement assessment matrix. Because we are talking about the engagement of the stakeholder, we categorize the levels of engagement. What levels of engagement are there? For example, if he is not aware of anything that is happening in the project, that means he is least engaged. On the other hand, if the person is actually leading the project, then he has the maximum engagement. So he's self-driven, he's leading the project ahead. So that is the maximum engagement, and minimum is he's not even aware of what is going on. So there are also some 3 sub steps between this least and the highest. So the first thing could be he's unaware, right? Or secondly, he's resistant, or he's neutral. I'll make good use of, because of the lack of space, I keep reading out, and then I think you can understand it. So we have stakeholder 1, stakeholder 2, stakeholder 3, for example. And then we have 5 stages of engagement: the first stage, second stage, third stage, fourth stage, and fifth stage. In the very first stage, we have unaware. He is not aware of what is going on in the project. The last, we have leading, right? He is maximum engaged. So the stakeholder 1, is he here or is he here? So similarly, what are the steps in between? We have somebody who is resistant, somebody who is neutral about the project, and somebody who is supporting but not leading. Right. So these are the 5 different stages of the engagement level. So what happens here is, in this representation model, if a person is here and he wants to reach at this stage, he has the desire but he's still not aware. So that is the level of engagement that this person needs, right? So how do we identify it? Instead of using these arrows, they are given simple letters like current level and desired level. They use C and D in this decision making matrix. For example, the person 3 who is identified here, he is currently neutral, for example, and then he wants to, his desire is to become supportive. So when we finish such a table, we understand that a person 3 is currently at a neutral stage, and the project manager desires, or the person himself, the stakeholder himself desires, that he will go to a supportive stage after doing this engagement activity. So in addition to this, we have multiple meetings that can also be used as important tools and techniques. So let's move to the new process: manage the stakeholder engagement. This is also basically done throughout the project, not done at any one point of time. This is basically about solving the problems between the two stakeholders. If there is an issue, we give a solution to the problem. Anything that is stopping the stakeholders from being engaged, we have to provide a solution to this. Let's have a look at the outputs that we are expected to give. Change requests. Any change requests that come up during the process, they can be updated. They are to be updated. The components of the project management plan, like communications management plan, stakeholder engagement plan, they are updated here. The project documents like change logs, issue logs, lessons learned, risk register, all of them are updated here. And what inputs we will be needing? Again, we can see all the general inputs. So all the possible components from project management, they can be referred to. All the project documents which are relevant can be referred. The default enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets are also referred as inputs. Let's have a look at the tools and techniques. Again, similar expert, somebody who's expert in the engagement techniques, he can be consulted. We should have a very good communication skills to bring out the team and improve this engagement. Same goes with the interpersonal and team skills. Somebody who can motivate, who is quite successful in engaging the stakeholders. Ground rules. I think we spoke about the ground rules at the very beginning of our lectures. These are nothing but predefined agreements between the team, between the stakeholders. It's like the team charter, right? Team charter, we all understood what that is in the previous process. So this team charter is created, which has basic set of rules that that every stakeholder has to adhere to. So they become very important tools and techniques for improving the engagement. And finally, the meetings, as we keep on discussing. Moving on, monitoring the stakeholders. This process is also done throughout the process project. All those strategies that we have created so far, to boost the engagement, they are assessed here. So the performance of all those processes, we are going to control them or monitor them. Let's have a quick look at the outputs. We have 4 outputs to bring. The first thing is the work performance information. This could include the status of the project, the status of the engagement level matrix that we discussed, whether the engagement level has been improved or not. So that's about it. And the change requests, whatever change that has been done, they have to be updated here. The project management plan and the relevant components get updated. Similarly with the project documents, the issue logs, lessons learned, all the project documents, you can update it after the process. Let's move to the inputs. Again, as you can see, the same set of generic inputs. We can refer to all the components from the project management plan, all the project documents, relevant project documents like risk register, issue log, they can be referred to. The work performance data, anything that is related to the stakeholders, that can be referred to, and the default enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets, are also referred. Moving on to the tools and techniques, we have multiple data analysis tools that we can make use of. If you recollect, we have alternate analysis. We have 2-3 options, and then we select one of the alternatives. That is the alternative analysis that can be used here. Root cause analysis can be used. So such data analysis tools and techniques we can use. The decision making, like different analysis, like voting, for example. We can make use of voting for some decision for us to arrive. Multi-criteria decisions are also taken. Like we have different criteria, what solutions we have. Right? So such techniques can be used here. Different data representation, we have learned so many of them through the course, so that all of them can be put to use here. Different communication skills, like giving frequent feedback, the presentation skills about the project statuses or the proposals that you're giving to develop the project or develop the product. All of them come quite handy. The interpersonal and team skills, we keep on talking about this, how important it is in this complete knowledge area. So active listening, leadership, networking, all these skills, they are quite handy here. And of course, the meeting. All right.